A good Erev Shabbos. We've watched with anxiety over the past few weeks as once again Israel has come under attack from beyond its borders and even from within those borders. As we have 3 or 4 or 5 times a day every day for the past couple of thousand years, we, meaning every Jewish community around the world, including the GTA and Kehillat Sharei Torah, have continued to pray, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, may the one who makes peace on high make peace for us here also. Sometimes it seemed closer, sometimes, like now, it seems a more distant goal, but it remains our hope and our prayer and our trust that peace, which in its purest form is a godly thing and therefore enduring and eternal, will eventually triumph over conflict. Conflict is a human invention, and by definition it's not lasting, even though it seems pretty tenacious sometimes. And we also hope and pray that eventually it doesn't take too much longer. We always read Parshas Naso in close proximity to Shavuos, and it gives us a lot of insight into how to achieve peace within ourselves. I still haven't figured out the recipe for world peace. If I do, I promise I'll write you a postcard from Oslo when I go to get my Nobel Prize. But in the meantime, while we're all trying to figure that one out, let's listen carefully to the 5 main components of this parsha, which seem pretty disparate, but really are talking about how each of us can bring different parts of ourselves together and come to peace, come to shalom, shlemut, completion within ourselves. Once we do that, peace among ourselves becomes much more reasonable a goal. And maybe by the time we work that out, it'll seem obvious to the whole world. The main parts of this parsha are the census at the beginning, then the parsha of the Sota, which speaks about adultery, then Nazarism, a person who assumes extra restrictions on their daily life, and then the priestly blessing, Birkat Kohanim, or Duchanin, and then the offerings of the Nesi'im to dedicate the Mishkan. Some seemingly unrelated elements that occupy this longest single parsha of any in the Torah, so let's go one at a time. Parshas Naso begins with counting. It's actually a sub-counting of a subgroup of the census of the Israelite nation. It's the families of Gershon and Merari, who were sons of Levi, and those are the ones who are counted here. The counting of Levites was carried out separately than the census of the rest of the Jewish people. And the first clan, that of Kahas, who numbered among its children Moshe and Aharon and their families, those are counted at the end of last week's parsha, Bamidbar. So their cousins, Gershon and Merari, get to begin a parsha on their own, even though their portfolios don't seem as important as Kahas. Kahas's job was carrying the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark itself, and having Moshe and Aharon among their number. Gershon and Merari transport and are responsible for items of lesser kedusha, lesser levels of sanctity, still holy, but not as holy as the ark and the high priest and all that goes along with that. Still, they are, according to what we know, happy and dedicated to their task. We would all like to be Moshe and Aaron. We'll see that desire later with Korach's rebellion. But not all of us get to play the starring role in the drama all the time. We learned from Gershon and Merari that the jobs that are less in the limelight are still mission critical to the Jewish people's endurance and success. So, for most of us who find our work more backstage, we can take inspiration from these families of Leviim who did their work faithfully and with a whole heart. Then we get to the parsha of the Sota. This is an uncomfortable topic for modern readers because the issue at hand is a suspected adulteress. What happens when a married woman is suspected by her husband of acting in an unfaithful way? So people take offense and they say it's not fair. What about a husband who's suspected of infidelity? Why is it only the woman who has to undergo this process, and so on? These are good and valid questions, and they do deserve investigation and discussion, hopefully to a point where we can come to terms with the concepts and the values that the Torah is expressing here. Let's suggest, though, that line of questioning, valid as it is, sometimes gets in the way of us asking the bigger questions, which we should always do, of how does this apply to me? What about a person whose partner is not suspected of infidelity? How about a person who's not married? How about a person for whom traditional relationships, as they call it now, heteronormativity itself, raises questions? Those are really some of the bigger issues under the rubric of what has this all got to do with me? Perhaps in this paradigm of the suspected adulteress, the sota, the focus is really on the dynamic of infidelity itself. Sota and the verb that's associated with this whole process at the outset of the Torah's narrative, siste, are words that relate to the noun shtut, folly or foolishness, leading some of the great Jewish ethicists to postulate a person only sins when the spirit of folly, the ruach shtus as it's called, enters into that person. Of course, in a committed relationship, we can appreciate how people get frustrated and feel they have to act out, perhaps. In the universal context of us and God, which is also a committed long-term relationship, why does a person feel frustrated that they have to act out and do something foolish like infidelity, which in that relationship sometimes expresses itself as idolatry in its many different forms? Why? Because a spirit of foolishness enters into us. We don't see an alternative. We can't see our way to being satisfied and content and nourished by the relationship. So we do something silly for attention, maybe to let off steam, to express our dispiritedness, which implies that our better selves don't really mean it. It's sort of a temporary insanity defense for any sin we commit. We temporarily took leave of our senses. Happens to the best of us. What can you do? So back to the question, is infidelity, which not only means being unfaithful to a partner if you have one, but really at a deeper level means acting in a way that's not consonant, not harmonious with your best self that you know you can be? Is that something that applies only in one very limited context, or is it something that everyone relates to at some time or another, some fashion or another? I would argue for the latter, that we all confront these feelings sometime or other in our lives, and in order to move toward peace with ourselves, it's much more helpful if we can recognize that sometimes we feel like doing things we know are foolish simply because we're in a foolish mood. If we name that and put it in its proper context, then it's not an overwhelming passion that controls our lives, but maybe more of a passing fancy over which we can exercise some restraint, some self-mastery. Next, on the heels of that topic, comes the Nazir, the Nazirite. For whatever reason, the Nazirite decides to take upon himself or herself extra parameters of restraint above and beyond what the Torah mandates. These people abstain, normally for a period of 30 days of Nazirism, abstain from haircutting, from drinking wine or even grape juice, which of course is a mitzvah for Kiddush, and from contact with the dead. And of course we know that burying our dead is a very elevated and lofty mitzvah, chesed shel emes. But the Nazir isolates themselves for a period of a month, opting out from quite a bit from normal existence. By the way, this Nazirism is implicit in Kol Nidre when it speaks about vows. A neder is a vow, right? So Kol Nidre is all the vows. And it's explicit in Hataras Nadarim, the release from vows, basically a longer, more formalized version of Kol Nidre that we say on Erev Rosh Hashanah, where we petition for a release from all vows, including B'chol Lashon Nazirus. That's what the text says. You can take a look in your Siddur. You'll find it on page 765. So what is this Nazir? What's this Nazirite doing with this extra abstention, with this forbidding oneself from forms of natural, normal, and even mitzvah-based interaction with day-to-day life? Other times we've discussed that the Nazirite has to bring a sin offering after their 30-day period of abstention ends, maybe for refraining from things that the Torah didn't say stay away from, maybe for this desire to be extra or ultra-religious. Leave that aside for a moment. What is the Nazirite doing? They're taking a step back. They're taking himself or herself out of the normal day-to-day, the routine that we follow, oftentimes without giving it a whole lot of thought. The Nazirite, let's imagine, takes a step out of that flow of life to reflect, contemplate, examine their lives, and perhaps even make adjustments to how that life is being lived. Although Nazarism is certainly not widely practiced today, and is definitely not for everybody, it's hard to overemphasize the importance of reflection and contemplation in becoming a better person and a better Jew. The ritual year more or less hands us the chance to do this at certain points, on the high holidays for sure, in Elul with Slichos for sure, perhaps in parts of Tachanun, in the daily prayers, and for some who have adopted this practice, daily introspection at the bedtime Shema, just before going to sleep, taking inventory, thinking over the day. How did it go? Where could I have improved? What can I resolve to do better tomorrow? There's another practice that it's not our custom at KST to observe. It's in our luach, but we don't practice it here. It's called Yom Kippur Katan, mini Yom Kippur. On the eve of not each Rosh Chodesh, but many Rosh Chodashim throughout the year, once a month, more or less, people say extra prayers and confessions. Some even fast a half a day. The Nazarite, back to our topic, the Nazarite puts himself or herself on pause for this 30-day period. They step out of the normal routine, and hopefully at the end of it, they come back having sobered up, literally and figuratively, with a more clear-eyed view of what life should be and how to live it in a better balance. According to the Al-Sheikh HaKodesh, Rabbi Moshe Al-Sheikh, the Nazarite retains their title. They're still called a Nazir, even after they finish the process, and they go back to saying L'chaim once in a while, and they get their haircut. Hopefully, this time of introspection and moving towards inner peace has a similarly lasting impression on them going forward. Next element in this very rich parsha is the priestly blessing. Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, may God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka, may God make his countenance shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God lift up his countenance to you and give you peace. We were privileged to hear this blessing with love from the mouth of our Kohen at Pesach time. Sadly, we missed out having a minyan on Shavuos when Duchanan also happens. Hopefully by the time Rosh Hashanah comes around, we'll all be well, we'll be vaccinated, we'll be in shul together, and we'll enjoy all the blessings that come with that, not the least of which is hearing the Kohanim bless us, as is their privilege and mitzvah. Even when we don't have a formal duchening, which outside of Israel only takes place on Yom Tif, the Chazan, in repeating the Amidah in the mornings, says it as a quote. Says, this is what the Torah tells the Kohanim to say. And then the Chazan says these words. Even when we don't have a minyan, when one Jew blesses another with gesundheit, or you should be well, these are also blessings, calling down Hashem's brachas upon each other. We do it all the time. But as we said at the outset, we're praying for divine peace, something that's eternal and cannot be broken, in contrast to what we have, which is good, but not the best. Human peace, where we agree to stop fighting. That's a great thing. But once we stop agreeing, or we agree to stop agreeing, then we're back to the fighting. The Abarbanel says that all three verses of Birchas Kohanim are directed at three segments of Am Yisrael. Hashem bless you and keep you is directed toward workers, so that their labors, the fruit of their hands, will be blessed. Blessed, by the way, means blessed in the quickest and fullest sense. God sends blessing, God's goodness. Sometimes it runs into roadblocks, speed bumps along the way, or there's something blocking it from getting to us. Hashem also sends rain, right? But if you put up an umbrella, the rain doesn't fall on your head. If you leave Toronto where it's raining, and you go to Florida where it's not raining, then you don't get any rain on you at all. Same thing with brachas. The brachas are raining down on us. Some people put umbrellas up over themselves, or even they hold it out over others so the brachas don't hit them. Once, they're in one place where it's raining brachas, and they go to another place where it's not. Okay, the request is that all the good that Hashem sends us reaches us directly and quickly. So, talking about Abarbanel's explanation verse by verse, the first verse, workers and the fruit of their hands. The second verse, may God shine his countenance on you and be gracious to you, or enhance you. That's a bracha to the scholars and the thinkers, says Abarbanel. May God send you light and enlightenment, insight, so you can grasp and appreciate as much as a human mind possibly can. And thirdly, interestingly, may God lift up his countenance to you and give you peace. This is a bracha to the warriors, the fighters of our people, the soldiers and commanders. What's our bracha? May you be out of a job soon. Let's extend the Abarbanel's comment one measure further. Let's appreciate that all of us do all these roles. We work with our hands. We put physical effort into some things. Let's appreciate that each of us is also a scholar and a thinker in our own way. We read, we listen, we try to figure things out, and we want to have it all make sense. And we're all warriors. We all have our battles to fight, many externally and many internally. The bracha here is that the war ends, that we achieve our goals without even having to fight, which means conflict and strife and danger and wasted energy. So each line of these precious brachas is essential for each of us. First, finding peace within ourselves so that we can find peace among ourselves. Which leads us directly to the last and lengthiest section of our parsha, the offerings brought by the heads of each of the 12 tribes when we dedicated the Mishkan, the tabernacle, in the desert. Spoiler alert, each of the 12 brought exactly the same thing. What was it? A silver bowl that weighed 130 silver shekels, which is about 48 ounces of silver or so. A silver washing basin, sprinkling basin that weighed about half that. Both of them were filled with fine flour mixed with olive oil, which was a grain offering. One gold spoon weighing 10 shekels, about 3 ounces, filled with incense. A choice young bull, a choice ram, and the choicest yearling lamb. A young male goat, and for a peace offering, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 male goats, and 5 yearling lambs. That was the contribution from each tribe, exactly the same amount. Not more, not less. And yet the Torah takes the time and ink to recount that same offering in those words 12 times, and then to do the math and give us the aggregate contribution. Altogether, this is what all 12 tribes brought. So whatever we just said, times 12. I love to emphasize this every time we come to this parsha or when we read it at Hanukkah time. The Torah here can't be emphasizing any more clearly or strongly that each person's contribution is valued and important. Sometimes there's a lot of difference. People are doing different jobs, bringing different things to the table. Sometimes, in some circumstances, we're contributing exactly the same. Whichever it is, what we each have to offer is valued, even if it's just the same thing that someone else is doing, because it comes from me or you. That alone gives it importance. That's 5 different aspects or avenues on the path to getting to peace within ourselves, knowing ourselves, accepting who we are and what we can do and what we should do. Parshas Naso, the name Naso literally means to elevate or to lift up. Now we just came down from the mountain. It was just Shavuos, and we all stood together at Sinai and accepted the Torah together as one person with one heart. Now we're supposed to elevate ourselves, to raise ourselves up? You betcha. That's what it's all about. Wherever we were before Shavuos, now we're at a higher level for having gone through the experience. The next step is not to settle in or chas v'shalom start drifting backwards. The next step is to take ourselves even higher. Pointed in the right direction, any effort, large or small, takes us closer to where we want to be. So here's to starting on the next step of the journey. May all our efforts at inner peace radiate outward and move everyone and everything closer and closer to true and lasting and eternal peace. Good Shabbos.